Good evening. Tonight is May the 7th, 2025. Right now it is 8:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the topic of tonight's video is yesterday's election of the German chancellor in the German parliament, the Bundestag. And I wanted to give you a few thoughts and insight on this election. As you may have gotten already yesterday from the newspapers here, is that the election itself was looked at as almost ranging from a catastrophe to historic proportions, and this whole black cloud thing started to float over this whole thing right from the get-go, because Freddie didn't get the first or enough votes in the first ballot. And there's a few things to be said to this. For one, is why I'm not weighing too much into this is because historically, because they've said that never happened in 80 years, well, for over 40 or 50 years, there were really only 3 parties and then later 4 parties in the West German parliament at that time. And something like this was not quite feasible, because it was usually a coalition between the liberals, which are no longer there in this Bundestag because they didn't make it over the 5%. And they used to have 5 to 10%, usually 7%. That was where they wound up. So they would then go with either the Social Democrats or the Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Socialist Union, the CSU, the Bavarian counterpart. And it was always the liberals which basically provided the majority, in these constellations. So for years, and of course they would have not voted against their, chancellor, because that was kind of agreed on. This has changed now. We have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parties plus 2 independent representatives in there altogether. And so the larger parties, what we used to call Volksparties, the Socialists and the Christian Democrats, the 2 big parties, have become much smaller in terms of their vote in the elections, because people tend to vote now more like for AfD or for the left or for the Green Party, or they voted for the Liberals. So each party has gotten less votes, in the last 20 years or so, and that has changed the constellation. That is one thing which has contributed to this now, what we saw yesterday. That is an important factor. We shouldn't undermine this, and that is similar to what we had here in the United States with the Republicans trying to elect the Speaker of the House. If I want to remind my viewers of how many ballots that took and how many hours they had to work on this until it was actually done, and they had enough votes to get the first speaker, in, and then they got another speaker. Now it seems like it has somewhat stabilized. But you had 4, 5, 6, 7 holdouts in the Republican Party in the House of Congress, and they kind of did the same thing. What happened here is very similar. So we had it here in the United States for the very first time, just 2-3 years ago, at the midterm elections in 2022, or afterwards then in the beginning of 2023, when the new Congress constituted, and they couldn't get their Speaker of the House elected in the first ballot. And it took, was it 15 ballots it took? Something like this, or 14 ballots. It took forever, wee hours of the morning, and, they almost had a fist fight breaking out on the floor, and this, that, and the other thing. Anyway, so there's a principal change in voter behavior, and this is really reflected in the diversity of our societies with the advent now of the internet and, portable phones or cell phones, handies, and now the smartphones, where we receive a lot more information over our smartphones today than we probably do from television, just what we had like 20 years ago. Or at least for me, it is the case where I get virtually all information now from my cell phone, from my smartphone, from my iPhone in this case. The same iPhone which is recording this video right now, which I could have not made 10, 15 years ago, just that short period of time. I would have to have completely different video equipment in order to produce something like this. Like a podcast. I'm going to call these videos now podcasts, so the viewer who scrolled through can see immediately it's a podcast. And if they don't want to watch me, or just listen to it, then they can just scroll on and they don't start watching the video and then watch that for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and they drop out. I rather not get the amount of views and have the viewers drop out after 30 seconds. I rather would like to have those viewers who are interested in this topic and they can listen to me for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. Then those viewers are more welcome. Not that a curious or interested viewer who stumbles in here should not feel turned away, but you may want to listen to it. But I prefer, it makes more sense to me. I listen to quite a few German and American podcasters on it, and what I do is I turn the volume all the way up at night when I go to sleep, and I put the phone next to me so I don't watch the video, but I listen to what those folks have to say. And it goes from left to right. There's nothing I exclude, because every person, it is like you're putting a pearl chain together, and every person gives you a pearl, no matter what political orientation they are. And it broadens your horizon, at my horizon, I think, to that extent that I have a better overview of what is going on in the society and the different opinions on all sides, and then you can get a better picture of what actually is going on. Anyway, back to the ballot itself, just a few numbers real quick. The House of Representatives, in this case the Parliament in Germany, for this legislature has 630 members. In the first ballot, 621 voted, so 9 didn't vote. I don't know if they were there or if they had another important thing, like the cat had diarrhea or the goldfish was having babies, kind of situation that they had to be at home, or they just did not vote at all. I don't know if that's possible or not. Out of those this is the first ballot now, 310 voted yes for Freddie, 307 voted no, 3 abstained, and 1 was invalid. And 316 were needed in order to win or become chancellor. Now, and this is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, now they had to make a change to the docket or to the program for that day, was because normally in the case that this happens, the House order calls for another vote then in 2 weeks. And they didn't want to wait 2 weeks. They wanted to do it yesterday, the second ballot. And for that, they had to vote and get a 2/3 majority to actually move the date up. I will get into that in a minute, because that's what caused more concerns than actually doing what they did. In the second ballot, only 618 members voted, so 3 other ones joined the other 9 earlier who did not vote. It still needed 316 votes to win the election. At that point, then 325 voted yes, 289 voted no, 3 were invalid, no one abstained. So this is kind of where it changed. Suddenly we had only one invalid vote. I do not know how you can make an invalid vote, but I guess you could mark both boxes, yes and no, and that would render this as invalid, I guess, since it was a secret election. So this was not a called election where every member had to declare of how he was voting, but it was a secretive vote in this case. So this is basically what we're looking at. The constellation of the Bundestag right now: 2 independent members, 151 members of the AfD, 85 Green Party, 64 the left, 208 is the Christian Democrats and the Christian Socialists combined, and 120 in the Socialist Party. That gives the CDU SPD 328 votes. And that means since he got only 310 in the first round and 325 in the second round, that the no vote must have come, or those people here who did not vote for him either voted no, abstained, or were then not present when they actually voted. They did not vote, participate in it, or they marked their ballot invalid. So this is kind of the numbers in there. So there's nothing really surprising, but you would figure that the 328 members of this coalition, or members of parliament, would support their coalition, which should have given them 328 votes in the first ballot, in the first round, and he fell 18 short in the first one, and in the second vote then he had enough votes, but it was still 3 short of the members, combined members of Christian Democrats, Christian Socialists, and the Socialist Party. And now the whole problem really with this is this starts. Let me just continue on this, what I was saying here, with the moving up the second ballot from 2 weeks to the same day. That took a 3/4 majority of the House to actually get that on the docket so they could actually vote for it a second time that day. And that meant that the Socialists and the CDU had to get the votes from the Green Party and the left, in order to get the 3/4 majority they needed. Yeah, the Green Party would have gotten them 408, and 5 is 413, and 3/4, 315. Yeah, they needed the left, or some members of the left party, of the Communist Party, to actually get over 3/4. And that's exactly what happened. And the Christian Democrats had said they wouldn't vote on anything or do anything which included the left party, the communists. But yet, yesterday, they willingly had to accept the votes from the left in this constellation in order to get this actually on the docket for a second ballot. That's the first critical point, that the CDU tolerated that. And this brings us now to a general issue which is utterly important. Now, we know that the Christian Democrats said they have a firewall towards the AfD, and so do the other parties, so the left, the Green, and the Socialists. They don't want to vote on anything where the AfD where they could get votes from the AfD to get something going. On the other hand, is when you use some logic to this, then you have to look at this and say, now the AfD said they would not vote for Freddie. If these other parties would say, well, we don't really want to vote the way the AFD votes, that would have meant they had to vote for Freddie, even though they really didn't want to vote for Freddie. The left didn't probably want to vote for him. The Green Party, maybe, but it's quite possible that they didn't because they weren't included in the coalition. But yet they voted no as well in that election, or in this ballot, in both ballots. And that is where the whole insanity actually comes in with setting these firewalls. So what do you do now? If you don't want to vote, if the AFD announces ahead of the election of that vote, we're not going to vote for Freddie Mertz, then if I'm a member of the Green Party, I would have to think now, if I'm going to vote no, I vote exactly the same way the AFD is going to vote. So that leaves me only with two options. I either vote abstain, or I have to not vote at all. I mean, some members obviously have done that. And some of them, they probably did this on purpose with the invalid vote they submitted. So this is basically, you can give an invalid vote, abstain, or not vote at all. That is your three options if you don't want to vote the way the AFD voted. But this gives an unbelievable power to the AFD because of the limitation of that firewall they set up, that the AFD literally can now direct the entire Bundestag on how other members are going to vote or not going to vote. And this is how crazy this whole thing is. So no one is really anymore at liberty as a member of the parliament to vote their conscience or the way they want to vote without being guided by what the AFD does, especially when they announce this publicly before they vote, and then the entire party votes that way, in that case the AFD. So this is the logic in this. This is absolute utter insanity, if you ask me. How they want to come out of this, I don't know. Now, on the other hand, does that mean that Friedrich Merz or Freddie Merz is going to have now an obstacle ahead? Looking at these constellations in the Bundestag, looking at the topics they're going to have to deal with, looking of what they want to do, I would say it is possible that there's SPD members which will, when it comes to enacting laws or voting on laws, that they will not vote with the majority of that coalition. And that could jeopardize many projects or many things they want to do. This could get as bad, depends on how touchy the issue at hand is, that this entire coalition may break apart. It will be very difficult for Friedrich Merz to steer that ship as a captain. That is, I would say, a given. But you should never, pronounce someone dead, because the dead always live longer than what most people anticipate. So we will just have to wait and see on how this is going to develop. The CDU today, in one of their first actions, closed down now all of German borders to certain asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants and that sort of stuff. They can no longer enter Germany as of today. If they're going to follow a similar strategy as what Trump is doing in the United States, with basically, deporting immigrants because of a variety of reasons, that needs to be seen, because they don't like that word deportation when you translate it into Germany, because that brings us back to 1939 and later, with the trains going east to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and all these other places. and we really don't want to have a repeat or anything similar to this, what we had back then. Not at all. This is not in our objective. Now, you can't really say that is happening here in the United States at the moment, but these people are going to be deported. There's no question about it. If they're going to get to the numbers they're trying to achieve to get people out of here, we will see. On that note, I wanted to give you another example of the insanity in our politics here. Now, when Joe Biden was elected in 2020, whether he stole it or he got elected, I leave that up to the viewer to determine how you want to look at that. I'm not going to make a judgment call on this. Whenever that was decided that he was going to be the president in 2021, the Democrats had a majority in the House and in the Senate. So they could have had enacted easily laws to help immigrants here. The ones who have been here illegally, they could have gotten legalized. We call that an amnesty. It is not popular among the population here at all, but something like this could have been done. Now to grasp the insanity of our political system here, especially on the Democratic side, is the Democrats did nothing when they had the majority, because the Democrats, since it is a larger Volkspartei, basically covers pretty much everything from the center to the far left, where the far left is a smaller but very vocal bloc, and the center left is pretty big size. That is your middle class and everything else what comes with it. And the middle class here is not very much in favor of amnesties and that sort of thing. The staunch supporters of illegal immigrants are on the far left. You have to know that. So they did nothing except for working on Biden's super projects there, with spending trillions of dollars. And then came 22, the midterm elections, where the Senate basically broke almost even, and the Republicans gained a small majority in the House. After that election, when that new Congress constituted, that's when these knuckleheads of Democrats started to sponsor a bill to legalize illegal immigrants. At that point, when they had no more majority, when there was virtually no possibility of this thing ever becoming law, that bill, that's when it was sponsored. And they did this strategically. There were first 10, 15 members of Congress of the Democratic Party who sponsored that bill. Then it went to the House Judiciary Committee, I think it was, where it was docketed. Since they all go to committee first, the committee never took it up because it was now a Republican in charge as the chairman of that committee. So that bill is what we call died in committee. It never went to the floor for a vote, but we had in the end, shortly before Biden announced he would not run or changed his mind of running, had 80 Democratic congressmen supporting it. These assholes ran around all across the country telling the Latino community, are they all going to sponsor this, and we're all going to put this in, and we're all going to do that, and fully knowing that this thing was in the process of dying in committee because they had a Republican chairman in there, and there was absolutely no chance, because he didn't have a majority in the House, to even advance this onto the floor if it would have made through the committee. And this is how stupid, this is how these members we have in Congress, they think how stupid the population is to put this show and the circus on. And this very particular action was the underlying reason that so many Latino voters who were here legally but were supporting their illegal countrymen winded up voting for Trump. It is a paradox, but they knew because, how would you feel if you belong to this community? You listen to the Democrats, they're trying to sell you something like if they're selling a can of tuna to the public is something great and we're fighting for your cause and we are right there with you, fully knowing that this thing is never going to go anywhere, but it was dying in committee while they were selling this as a hot cake to the Latino public or left-wing Democrats to begin with. With this great insanity, I'm going to say goodbye from America, and I hope you got a little bit of an insight into this whole thing. I will be checking in here as we go along and as the news unfold. With that, you have a great evening.